The Indiana Fever's internal tension just boiled over.
And Stephanie White did it for him. She completely eliminated Caitlin Clark. Not only did she eliminate Caitlin Clark, she turned Caitlin Clark into an optional player. Yes, she was not basically main target. Offense ran through her. She ran everything through Kelsey Mitchell.
The superstar has been sidelined in her own offense. Let that land for a second. Not benched, not resting, sidelined, within the offense, within the flow of the game, within the system that was supposed to be built around her. The most dynamic playmaker in the league reduced to standing in the corner while the ball moves somewhere else. This is not a minor adjustment. This is a philosophical shift with enormous consequences. And the consequences are now sitting in the loss column.
In a press conference, Caitlin Clark looked like she refused to talk. Caitlin Clark looked like she did not want to sit next to her very own coach, Stephanie White.
The body language said everything.
All of the things she done for the city of Indianapolis, all the economy boost, all of the money that's been made for Pacer Entertainment, and this is how they treat their superstar player.
And now the rumor exploding across the league claims Stephanie White and the Indiana Fever coaches are furious after Caitlin Clark blamed them for the back-to-back losses. The power struggle is no longer hidden. Let's break every layer of this down. To understand why Clark apparently blamed the coaching staff for these losses, you have to understand what has been happening to her role inside this offense, because it didn't happen overnight. This is a slow shift that has been building over multiple games, and it finally reached a breaking point. According to the loudest voices watching this team, Stephanie White has systematically reduced Caitlin Clark's role. The ball no longer runs through the best creator in the league. Instead, the offense has been funneled toward Kelsey Mitchell while Clark is treated like a secondary option, a role player in a system that should revolve around her ability to create for herself and others. Now, let's be fair to the coaching staff for one moment. There are legitimate reasons to want to involve Kelsey Mitchell more heavily in the offense. Mitchell is a proven scorer. She is capable of creating off the dribble. She has earned her role on this roster. Running more through her is not an inherently bad idea. The problem is what it costs when you do it at Clark's expense. Because Clark is not just a scorer. She is a creator. She is the reason defenses collapse. She is the reason teammates get open looks. When you remove Clark from the center of the offense, you don't just lose her individual production, you lose the gravitational pull that makes the entire offense harder to guard. You lose the thing that makes Indiana a genuinely difficult matchup for any defense in the league. Reduce Clark to a role player and you lose all of that. You lose the gravity. You lose the creation. You lose the chaos that her presence creates for opposing defensive coordinators. And what you're left with is an offense that is easier to guard, easier to scheme against, and ultimately easier to beat. The Dallas Wings figured that out. The New York Liberty confirmed it. When Clark is not the engine, this team is a different team, a worse team, a team that can be beaten by opponents they should handle.
And Stephanie White did it for him. She completely eliminated Caitlin Clark. Not only did she eliminate Caitlin Clark, she turned Caitlin Clark into an optional player. Yes, she was not basically main target. Offense ran through her. She ran everything through Kelsey Mitchell.
For a player sitting in the MVP conversation and generating massive economic value for the franchise, the optics are brutal. A role player on her own team, and the offense that her presence made worth watching. The coaching staff made a decision. The decision produced back-to-back losses. And now, according to the rumor, the player who was marginalized by that decision has made her feelings known, loudly enough that the coaches are reportedly furious. That is the sequence, and every part of it traces back to a choice Stephanie White made about how to run this offense. Let's talk about the losses themselves, because the back-to-back defeats that triggered this whole situation were not flukes. They were not bad shooting nights that happened to stack up. They were structural failures that revealed exactly what happens when you neutralize your best player. First, Dallas. The Wings came in and executed a defensive game plan that was built around limiting Clark's involvement as a primary creator. And because the Fever's offense had already shifted away from running things through Clark, Dallas didn't even have to work that hard to do it. The system was already doing Dallas's job for them. Clark was already on the perimeter, already in the corner, already operating as a secondary option. All Dallas had to do was make sure Mitchell couldn't carry the full offensive burden alone. And she couldn't. Then, New York. The Liberty are one of the best teams in the league. Deep roster, elite coaching, championship experience. Against a team like that, you need every weapon firing. You need Clark hunting favorable matchups, pushing pace, pulling defenders away from the paint, creating havoc from deep. Instead, the Fever ran a more conventional offensive structure that plays right into what a defense like New York's is designed to stop. 2 games, 2 losses, same structural issue at the root of both. The pattern is impossible to ignore at this point. When Clark is the engine, when the offense is genuinely designed to maximize what she does, the Fever are a genuinely dangerous team that any opponent has to game plan for carefully. When she's a role player, they're a middle-of-the-pack team that lives and dies with Mitchell's efficiency. And middle-of-the-pack teams lose to Dallas and New York.
The Dallas Wings exposed them the other night, and they just got exposed bad by the New York Liberty. Could the writing be on the wall for Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever?
The writing on the wall question is the one the whole league is now asking, because 2 losses in a row is a sample size. 2 losses in a row where the same structural problem showed up both times is a trend, and trends don't fix themselves. If Stephanie White does not adjust, if she continues prioritizing a Mitchell-centric offense over a Clark-centered one, the losses will continue, and at some point, the losses pile up enough that the front office has to make a decision about whether the coaching staff is the right fit for this team. Clark apparently sees that, and according to the rumor, she said so. Before we get to the blame rumor itself, let's talk about the most damning piece of evidence we actually have on camera. Because sometimes you don't need a source or a rumor or a leaked conversation. Sometimes the story is right there in the body language. The most damning visual came after the game. Caitlin Clark sat next to Stephanie White at the post-game press conference looking like she wanted no part of the conversation. Not fidgety, not visibly emotional, just closed off, disconnected, present in body but checked out in every other way. That is not a small thing. Clark is a professional. She knows how these press conferences work. She knows the cameras are on her. She knows the clip is going to be dissected by every corner of basketball social media within 30 minutes of the final buzzer. When she still looks like that on camera, when the professionalism doesn't fully cover what she's feeling, the feeling must be significant. Body language does not lie. When your franchise superstar appears uncomfortable simply sharing the podium with the head coach, the relationship is fractured. That's not speculation. That's not reading too much into a moment. That is a player communicating something to anyone paying attention. And everyone was paying attention. Now at Stephanie White's side of that podium, what does a coach look like when she knows her star player is sitting 2 feet away and actively not engaging? Uncomfortable, careful, choosing words deliberately, talking about process and effort and focus on the next game. The standard post-loss coaching language that says a lot without saying anything. The gap between those 2 energies at that press conference is a physical representation of the gap that exists inside that locker room right now. Clark knows something is wrong. White knows Clark knows. The cameras caught all of it, and now the basketball world is connecting the dots. That's the pattern that makes this situation so charged. White talks. Clark doesn't. White covers the conversation with process language. Clark's silence says more than any answer could. When a superstar chooses not to speak, the silence is a statement. And in this context, the statement is clear. Whatever I'm feeling right now, I am not going to say it here. But I am also not going to pretend everything is fine. I am going to sit here and let the camera see exactly how I look. And if you want to read into that, you're probably right. Here is the claim currently dominating every timeline. After the back-to-back losses, Caitlin Clark made it clear, either in private conversations, in her body language at the podium, or in subtle public comments, that the coaching staff's decisions were responsible for the defeats. She pointed to the reduced role, the lack of designed actions for her strengths, the overall offensive structure that has turned the league's best playmaker into a corner shooter and occasional secondary ball handler. And according to the rumor, Stephanie White and the rest of the coaching staff did not take that feedback well. They are reportedly furious. Let's think about why that reaction makes sense from the coaching staff's perspective, even if it doesn't make them right. Coaches do not like being blamed by players, especially publicly, or even semi-publicly. There is a chain of command in professional sports organizations that is built around the idea that the coach makes decisions and the players execute them, and when things go wrong, you work it out in film sessions and practice, not through the press or through conversations that leak to media. When Clark signals, in any form, that the losses trace back to coaching decisions, she is challenging that chain of command. She is saying, out loud or through implication, the problem is not execution. The problem is the system, and the system is yours. That is a direct challenge to Stephanie White's authority, and coaches who feel their authority being challenged rarely respond with calm, measured introspection. They respond with defensiveness. They respond with anger. They double down on their decisions to demonstrate that they are in control, which is exactly what sources are suggesting White has done, and which is exactly why the situation has escalated rather than resolved. That line captures the entire dynamic in 6 words. Clark's silence at the podium was loud. Loud enough that multiple people noticed it, commented on it, clipped it, sent it around. Loud enough that the coaching staff almost certainly saw the coverage and understood exactly what it communicated. Caitlin didn't say nothing, but she said everything. Whether Clark's frustration was expressed directly to White in a private conversation, or whether it filtered up through the organization in some other way, or whether the body language at that press conference was so obvious that the coaching staff didn't need anyone to tell them, the message landed. Clark is not happy with the decisions being made. The coaches are not happy that Clark is not happy, and the team is losing. That is the perfect storm. Let's zoom out for a moment and talk about what Clark actually means to this franchise. Because the coaching decisions being made right now are not happening in a vacuum. They are happening in the context of what Clark has built for Indiana, and that context matters enormously. Before Clark arrived, the Indiana Fever were a franchise in decline. Attendance was down. National television interest was minimal. The fan base was small and mostly local. Merchandise moved at normal rates for a mid-tier WNBA franchise. The economic footprint of the team in the Indianapolis market was real but modest. Then Clark came, and everything changed overnight. Sold-out arenas, waiting lists for season tickets, national primetime television slots on ESPN, jersey sales that broke WNBA records, a cultural conversation around the team that extended far beyond basketball fans, local businesses around the arena reporting increases in game night revenue, the Indiana Tourism Board talking about the Clark effect in terms of how many visitors the team was drawing to Indianapolis. This is what one player did, not a team, one player, and the franchise that benefited from all of that is now running an offense where that player is a role option. The fans see the contradiction, the media sees the contradiction, and according to the rumor, Clark sees it too. She knows what she means to this franchise. She knows the economic reality, and she knows that the decisions being made on the court are not aligned with that reality. That quote is the fan base speaking out loud what Clark is reportedly saying in private. And the alignment between those two things, the public frustration of the fan base and the private frustration of the player, is a significant problem for the Fever organization. When a superstar feels undervalued and the fans agree with her assessment, the pressure on the front office and coaching staff becomes enormous. It's not just a locker room issue anymore. It's a franchise issue, a market issue, a business issue. Indiana needs Caitlin Clark engaged, motivated, and feeling like the organization is invested in maximizing her. Right now, the signals coming from inside that building suggest she feels the opposite. And when a player of her magnitude feels the opposite, the consequences are not small. Let's spend a moment on Stephanie White's side of this, because the situation she's navigating is genuinely difficult, even if the decisions she's making are wrong. White was hired to bring defensive structure to a team that was giving up too many points. Her reputation was built on defense. Her coaching philosophy centers on defensive identity as the foundation of a winning team. That's not an unreasonable approach to basketball. But here's the problem. When you are coaching Caitlin Clark, the defensive identity conversation has to come second. Not because defense doesn't matter, it does, but because Clark's offensive impact is so singular, so irreplaceable, so impossible to manufacture with any other player on the roster, that building an offensive system around anything other than maximizing her creates a structural ceiling for this team. Great coaches adapt their philosophy to their personnel. They look at the roster and ask, what do we have? And how do we build something around what we have? The answer to that question when you have Caitlin Clark is not a Kelsey Mitchell first offense with Clark as a secondary option. The answer is obvious, and the failure to arrive at that obvious answer is what has produced these back-to-back losses. White is also navigating the impossible position of coaching a player whose cultural profile exceeds almost anyone else in the sport. Every decision she makes regarding Clark gets scrutinized by an audience of millions who are deeply invested in Clark's success and deeply suspicious of anything that looks like mismanagement. That pressure is real, and it's not something most coaches have ever had to deal with. But, and this is the critical point, that pressure doesn't change the basketball reality. The basketball reality is that Clark is the best player on this team, the most irreplaceable asset in the organization, and the primary reason the franchise is relevant on a national scale. The offense should reflect that. It currently does not, and the losses are the consequence. White's reported anger at Clark's blame suggests a coach who is not yet willing to look in the mirror and acknowledge that the structural decisions she's made have directly contributed to these results. That's a problem, and it's a problem that will continue to produce losses losses until something changes. Stephanie White is now dealing with a star who appears checked out in press settings, a fan base that is openly questioning the offensive philosophy, and according to the hottest rumor, a direct or implied message from Clark that the coaching decisions are responsible for the recent skid. The coaching staff's reported anger only confirms how deep the divide has become. This is the breaking point, not necessarily the end. These situations sometimes resolve when both sides decide the relationship is worth saving. But this is the moment where manageable tension becomes a genuine crisis. And genuine crises in professional sports organizations require decisive action from the front office. The Fever's leadership has a choice. They can stand behind White publicly, as they have already done, and hope that the internal friction gets resolved quietly. Or they can acknowledge that the offensive structure is not working, that the star player is not being used correctly, and that changes need to happen immediately for the sake of the season. The longer the first option persists without results, the more pressure builds toward the second. Clark is not going to become suddenly comfortable with being a role player. The offense is not going to start working without her at the center of it. The losses are not going to stop if nothing changes. And the fan base, the massive, engaged, nationally televised fan base that Clark built, is watching all of it in real time. The Indiana Fever are no longer just losing games. They are losing the trust of their biggest star. And those two things, happening simultaneously, in front of the biggest audience this franchise has ever had, is a crisis that demands an honest response from everyone inside that organization. Did Clark really call out the coaching staff behind closed doors? Did the body language at that press conference say everything that needed to be said without a single word? Is Stephanie White's reported fury a sign of a coach who knows she's wrong but isn't ready to admit it? The answers to those questions are going to determine what the rest of this season looks like. And based on everything we've seen over the last 2 games, the clock is ticking. Drop your hottest take in the comments. I'm reading every single one. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this situation is moving fast, and you do not want to miss the next chapter.